Hey guys, Mustached here to review the video game Rise of Ronin. So, when I first saw this game, I was expecting some pretty good stuff. And so I went into it and did a full Let's Play, as well as a follow-up as to doing the alternative route from the original one that I had done. So I'll be doing this as separate as usual, with story and gameplay done respectively a little bit differently, but still as objectively as possible. So let's start with the story. So the Rise of Ronin follows a pseudo-historical version of when the West was starting to come over to Japan in terms of an occupied era of Japan when the shogun was still very much a thing, and you have other influences outside of America, such as the British and I believe French were the other two groups. There might have been one other one, but I digress. Point being is that there is that Japan in this era is reaching a boiling point in where it's going to go in terms of shifting the tone of what one would expect to see in Japan. So it takes this pseudo-historical approach, that being sort of whimsically recreating or reinvigorating stories of this to get people hopefully interested in the real history. And I always thought that this was one of the better approaches to doing, well, history, is getting engaged with sort of this more romanticized version of history first, if you don't have an inkling toward history. So much so that I sincerely considered arguing in favor of, having something like this being shown and taught in schools. Like, actually bringing in the game to a school, having people play it, and then actually have people learn from it. That is something I've definitely been considering a little bit more and more, with the ever-expanding ways that we are able to teach individuals, especially with the high school I attended, and how unique it was versus every other high school in the United States of America, but I digress. Point being is that this game does serve to tell a pretty interesting story, where again there are a lot of moving parts. Each character has their own ideals that they want to put forth, whether, how to defend Japan, how vigorously, what you put at stake when, the stakes are that high, when you're against somebody who's invading you. All of this stuff comes into play as you meet more and more characters, and then it opens up even more, where you can choose between being for the shogunate and against the shogunate. So originally, when I first went through the story, I went through the against shogunate purely run initially, and then afterwards I went pro shogunate after beating the game the first time. And I found both to be quite substantive in terms of looking at these characters, in terms of how they interact in ways that, when there's, armies and, an ally from once, few missions ago, because of how drastically things have changed, is now an enemy potentially. Things of that nature definitely, especially towards this era piece, definitely feels to ring a lot more closer to something that I would imagine being closer to true rather than false. That, alliances were a lot harder to sort of keep track of, when you have somebody who is seeing this horror come upon them And, when their idea in kind is, well, horror, uh, or, to put upon a different type of tragedy or whatever it may befall upon, how does that conflict against a character who wants to see, in this instance, Japan bright, shining, uh, you know, seeing that not everyone coming from, say, the Americas is necessarily a bad guy. Presenting these nuanced takes about, like, well, yeah, there are definitely assholes among them too. It's not black and white. It's a little bit more scattered than that, and with each passing moment, it could scatter even further due to, again, these conflicts that can arise due to these differing opinions in terms of how one utilizes combat moving forward. There are these strategies, there are these, takes on when you look at pro-shogunate versus anti-shogunate that are intriguing. It definitely challenges both perspectives to a degree, which I think is the best approach to a dual story system such as this, where you have two varying outcomes. For example, they don't make the shogunate who is present in the game like a total asshole. Like, you meet him and you see, and you can do these quests with him, and the pro-shogunate, template, when you're on that path, you can see where he's coming from his perspective, why he's making the moves that he's making, come a little bit more clear versus when you're against him. And everything, when you're looking at it from the anti-shogunate, you're seeing a lot of that disparity, the lack of resources being brought out to the civilians, things of this nature. The people who are being inflicted upon most feel like they need to act upon it. These are definitely very much in line with challenging both sides. And you can only get, I think, a full picture by playing both sides at one point or another. Though, I don't think I would say it's mandatory, but I would say if you want the full picture, I think it's a higher recommend to do it as such, to do both paths, to see the characters, how they're interacting, what they are bringing to the table, what their weaknesses are in terms of, like, their philosophies, these attitudes that they're bringing in towards their combat, and so on and so forth. And so, with all of that, I must say that Rise of Ronin, in terms of its story, is really compelling. Simplistic, too, which is really great. Again, there are only two major pathways, so it's kept rather simplistic, but within its simplicity, it's still, pushing the boundaries within it. And I think that is very much high quality writing there, is challenging each perspective to a degree. And maybe even, doing it in varying different ways. Again, each mission, when you're following, again, like, say, the Shogunate, for example, as I just mentioned, you're seeing how he carries himself, why he's implementing the strategies that he's doing. He has his group, his sect of people that he wants to clearly protect, and people who clearly want to protect him as well. There's a titling process, that is, I would argue that that's more of an Eastern philosophy in terms of, like, which I would dare argue is probably something that has been a little bit something that has happened of late currently. If we're purely talking politics about how people follow people, there's definitely some of that happening now, so dare I say, that history finds a way to repeat itself, though a lot of other contexts are changing and shifting. There's always these little remnants that seem to cycle over and over again, and sure enough, we're in that cycle again, ourselves in America. So that is I suppose this review is an interesting timing in terms of when it might release, but uh, that's all very interesting. So I think that this story is impeccable. I would rise to the occasion, pun intended, I suppose, and say that I think that this is a 10 out of 10. I think that this is where stories should push themselves to be in this landscape of video games. This is a full video game, very little DLC. You get the whole package here, just buying the base game, and you get so much content out of it, which beautifully transitions just to the gameplay. So you have your choice of creating two Ronin, either male or female in this case. And what you do, you choose your style of weaponry, and you can choose from a wider variety of weapons as you move further along in the game. And you have your abilities that can increase. You have a leveling up system as you take over more areas in whichever to whomever you're serving. In this case, you being that Ronin, you're sort of free from the shogunate, but you can still serve under him. It's sort of like the idea of the Ronin is like they're sort of wandering without a master or a higher purpose per se, servitude. They sort of just serve whomever they felt compelled to serve or help, is sort of the idea of Ronin. Which I think is a very good concept in terms of like being able to, again, go back and forth and make those decisions a little bit more back and forth, because maybe even if you're going through it the first time, maybe you're seeing like, maybe I'm being convinced of the other side, or maybe I want to check out the other side as this wandering Ronin. It opens up that opportunity to you in that context. And in that regard, the gameplay is solid, and it's challenging, which, Koei Tecmo is at least more known for, outside of this, is more known for its hack and slash archetype, which I'm also a fan of. I have not shied away from expressing my fan, appreciation for Dynasty Warriors, for example, or Samurai Warriors, its counterpart. But, those games are very much in the hack and slash genre. They require a lot lower of a skill sort of threshold, I would argue, in terms of like, you could just sort of mash, you can relax a little bit, you could just mow down enemies. There's a definitely comforting threshold to the Dynasty Warriors games that is a bit more challenged in this, and I would assume that that is in large part due to their cooperation with, I think it's Team Ninja who did the I'm assuming is who did the more combative counterpart to the video game. And so you have this more akin to, almost not quite as, I would say, at the threshold as, say, a Dark Souls. Quite that, and I wouldn't push it that far, but I would say it definitely challenges you to a degree. I would actually argue that the threshold actually gets kind of close to Dark Souls at the end of it. Um, in regards to how the enemies fight you, they are aggressive. They have combos. They can stress you out, which is again very Dark Souls, like being very cautious of your poise in that instance, or whatever other word that they use in the Souls like games. So it does sort of uh, gap into there a little bit. I would argue towards again the middling and ending sections. So you can, there's a degree of like you can sort of stealth some enemies, but there are definitely more uh, areas where you'll have to become aggressive. And again, how aggressive you're being versus that stamina, which as you level up will grow and grow to an extent. And then there's a cap on that. So, you can have these really compelling fights where you start to learn how to counter an enemy, which would be blocking at the perfect opportunity, in which in this game it's called a counter spark. And you see the spark, knowing that you indicated that, which leaves the enemy that you're attacking open enough for usually a swath of approximately 3 to 4 attacks, depending on who you're going up against. Sometimes it's not even that many. Sometimes you get the late 2. Sometimes you do get that 3, but you got to be careful because, again, the enemies are very aggressive and they can just as easily put you in the red, and once you're there, they can do that heavy attack that can definitely dwindle down your damage. You have your healing items, of course, that can replenish, and you do start off with like the bare minimum of them, like 3 or 2 or whatever the starting point is. And then as you reach the conclusion, you get to about 8 of them. And, if you're not paying attention or if you're off, you'll definitely be consuming a lot more items, and there's definitely a timing and a rhythm to this game that is there's definitely a skill increase in this type of game that I would definitely put forward into this. And lastly, you have your equipment, which you have your stats on each of them. Luckily, you can choose, once you get the clothing option of something you like in terms of how it looks on your character, you can have that be your set design while just equipping anything else, and then your stats can be the ridiculously high number, which is determined by this color system where the sort of gray outline indicates this is a very base weapon. Then you have a green, which is a little bit more challenging, and then you have a gold, which is I guess I would say rare, and then after you beat the game you unlock the red system, which you get the red items. These are I would probably categorize these as ultra rares, I guess, if we were to do some sort of categorization of what type of items are what. And in this regard, the game definitely consistently keeps you engaged even past the point of beating the game, despite going through it and beating it twice. I'm still finding myself wanting to go back in and do the red challenges, just to see how much more difficult they make the game on a rerun, and they definitely ramp it up to, again, the degrees that I am talking about, where it feels like you're almost playing like a Dark Souls, but the person you're up against is, well, a humanoid, a person, But they're doing like these crazy combos, and you're dodging left and right, and you're trying to counter Spark. You're thinking about the distance between you and them. You're thinking about, where's their energy depletion at, how they're recovering, your recovery. All these systems are sort of intertwined, and there's a lot of back and forth about when you're the aggressor or when you're on the defensive in this case. A very high octane gameplay as you again reach that middling and ending section of this game. So I would qualify this as a game of the year, honestly, for 2024. I haven't heard if it's nominated yet. I'm baffled that I haven't heard anything about its nomination. That I think this game is completely flown under the radar in that indication. By that indication, I should say, rather. This game is phenomenal. If you have not played it, I would highly recommend it. Because I'm also going to give the gameplay a 10 out of 10. I think this is one of my favorite games I have played in my life in terms of like just crafting a full game where the combat is consistent and the story is very, very strong as well. Simple but strong, and its gameplay matches in terms of being high octaned, matching that challenging threshold where you're constantly finding your own balance in terms of how you want to play, how aggressive you want to be as the player, versus its systems of, making sure that you're not like spamming or, going into almost the hack and slash sort of gameplay that I was arguing about before, or rather alluding to before. So yeah, that is my full review for Rise of Ronin. If you have not picked it up, it's a highly recommend for me. And yeah, if you ended up enjoying this full review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. Want to head over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers. So get to my PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly, and third to my Discord server, you can join Collab Shield to let cool stuff for free. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.